Again, I'm Tom Melody and co-head the Real Estate Investment Banking Group nationally for Jones Lang LaSalle. Tom Fish, Big Fish, spoke earlier, and my brother Mike is in the audience here. So I like the name Big Fish. We're going to be using that for a while. Gary, thank you again for bringing two great economists recognized not only in Texas as I think the two preeminent, truly preeminent, but also nationally recognized economists here. We have Mark Dotzer from Texas A&M, Director of Research for the Center of Real Estate at A&M. What I noticed about both you guys, and I realized how bright you were, was you both got your PhD from the University of Texas. So, congratulations on that for both of you guys. So, Mark, before joining the center in 1997, was an associate professor at Wichita State University in the real estate department. Dr. Bill Gilmer from Dallas is a senior economist and vice president at the Federal Reserve Bank. Received his PhD, as I said, from the University of Texas, and co-manages the 11th District Regional Economic and his analysis up in Dallas, and joined the Houston branch before that in 1989. So we've been with the Reserve for quite a while now. Obviously the marketplace is changing dramatically, and short-term changes are it's hard to understand how they're going to occur or what's going to happen. One nice thing about these economists, I think we'll be talking a little bit more about, from a long-term, little longer-term perspective, what kind of changes can we maybe anticipate so that we can respond accordingly to take advantage of these changes. Both these guys are excellent speakers. I've heard them both over the years. I think everyone knows them. Most of y'all probably have heard them before. And thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. It's a pleasure to be back in front of a good, friendly Texas audience. I spent the first half of this week driving through New Mexico, where the most popular bumper sticker is if God intended for Texans to ski, he'd give them their own damn mountains. I was mostly visiting banks, but I did go up to Silver City, speak at a small university up there, western New Mexico. And I asked one of the sponsors, I said, how did we earn this reputation? And he said, look, it's, God's will. It's the way it is. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, look, when Lyndon Johnson died, he demanded to be immediately taken to God. And he said, God, why wasn't Jesus Christ born in Texas? And God said, look, Lyndon, we tried to work that out. We did our very best. We searched the whole damn state, though, and we could not find 3 wise men or a virgin. So your trips to Texas and Colorado, I suggest that you all be careful on these visits. Well, let's talk about Houston today, and I'm going to talk specifically about Houston, and necessarily that's going to get us into some discussion of the national economy and the global economy as well. This may or may not have been the Great Recession, 2 months longer than the 73-75 recession, 2 months longer than the 81-82 recession, and really marginally deeper than either one of those recessions, certainly accompanied by the financial crisis of the last 50 years. But one thing that was very distinctive about this recession was that everyone got caught up in it. By geography, by industry, everybody eventually wound up swept into this downturn. So anytime you want to talk about recovery of regions, almost any region in the U.S., you're talking about the recovery of the national economy. Houston is a little bit different from many other places in the U.S. because we're highly commodity dependent. And in a way, I think that means that we should be actually doing considerably better than we are right now. We should be moving ahead of the national recovery. And that's not really happening. And that's what I want to talk about today. some of the reasons perhaps that Houston is not doing as well as I think it should, and what's necessary to get us moving forward. This is just a glance at recent history in payroll employment. Over that period from 2003 to 2005, if you go 2003, 2008, if you go December to December, Houston added about 320,000 jobs. That's a major metro area. That's the size of an El Paso, Texas, for example, built and constructed with all of the streets, schools, highways, apartments, retail that has to go with a major metro area. But as fast as we can add jobs, we can lose them. We lost nearly 100,000 jobs in 2009 as we finally got caught in the recession. We came late to the recession, later than the nation as a whole, certainly. But once we were swept into it, like the rest of the nation, we were hurt and hurt very badly. Job growth has resumed this year at a 1% rate year to date, which is not particularly good, and again points, as I said, to perhaps slower growth than we would like to see. In fact, if you look at the 3-month percent changes in average annual changes, we just smoothed the curve out, that the line is the U.S. employment changes, and Houston, the red bars, you can see we come to the recession significantly later than the U.S. However, once in it, we find ourselves rapidly catching up with the U.S. and coming out. It's remarkable how closely we've really followed a very poor job performance in the U.S. And there you see relatively little difference there between the U.S. and Houston performance. Our business cycle measure, and this is a broader measure, this includes more than just payroll employment. This includes the unemployment rate, real wages, real retail sales, all combined together. And here you see a little bit better picture in the sense that it was a relatively mild downturn, believe it or not, in Texas, in Houston, certainly compared to the rest of the state. We actually peaked in November 2008, nearly a year after the U.S. as a whole, and our decline was relatively modest. Compare it, for example, to some of the other metro areas across the state, where in Dallas, for example, you see a nearly 8% decline in that same index, or in San Antonio or Austin, where it's 6 and 8% in terms of the extent of the decline. Also on the upside, however, once we get to the trough, and remember when we talk about a business cycle, you hit the peak, you decline, you stop declining, and you hit the trough, and then you begin the recovery phase. We have hit the bottom, the recession is over, we found the trough, we begin to recover, and that recovery phase continues until you get back to the prior peak. Well, as these numbers show you in terms of where we've come from the trough, the declines are nowhere near, the recovery is nowhere near. We're nowhere close to where we were before the recession began. Yes, the recession is over, but as we will see all across the nation, the recovery is very incomplete, and we are nowhere close to that prior peak. This is another way we can sort of compare Houston to the U.S. This is a Purchasing Managers Index. It's indexed at 50. If it's above 50, then you're expanding. Below 50, you're contracting. Notice how Houston separates itself at the end of 2003. That red line moves a good solid 10 points above the U.S. figures. And the U.S. is expanding for most of that period until we get to the end of 2007. That difference is oil. That difference is oil at $30, $40, $60, $80, $100 a barrel. And Houston economy has never seen $100 oil that it didn't like. And that period of separation, that period of what makes it different here from the rest of the country, even when it was doing well, the answer was a commodity boom, and a global commodity boom that was underway. You can see that once we were in the recession, we quickly caught up with the U.S. And again, this is another measure that shows us struggling somewhat. Houston's unemployment rate did not rise as high. You can see, however, like the U.S., we have seen relatively little improvement. And what improvement we see is really for the wrong reasons. It has to do with discouraged workers. People are no longer counted as unemployed, but not because they're finding jobs, but because they have quit actively looking for work, which is the definition of an unemployed person because they're discouraged and fallen out of the labor force.